by lethal injection, and it would be the 9th federal execution since Trump has resumed the practice after a 17-year hiatus. And this comes just as national opposition to the death penalty reaches more than a 50-year high, according to polling by Gallup. Now, although the death penalty is barbaric under any circumstance, the details of Mr. Bernard's death are particularly disturbing. He was 18 years old when he was convicted in the year 2000. And although he's admitted to participating in the crime that ended with 2 people being shot and killed, he himself was not the shooter. 2 others were also convicted for their involvement in this crime, and those 2 have since gone to prison, been convicted, and been released. Meanwhile, Brandon Bernard has been behind bars for the past 2 decades. And in prison, he has been a model of good behavior. He hasn't had a single disciplinary infraction, which is something that's very difficult to do within prisons. It basically means he's always kept his bunk clean and barely even said a curse word. And on top of everything, he has expressed grave remorse for his crime. And he has channeled that remorse into helping at-risk youth and mentoring them to make sure that they don't go on the same path that he did. He went in when he was 18 and has come out a model of good behavior. Well, not come out, but is now a model of good behavior at 40 years old. Here's a photo of Brandon Bernard with his family. And here's the thing. If federal officials proceed with Mr. Bernard's execution, they'll be doing so despite the wishes of the people who sentenced him to the death penalty. 5 of the 9 surviving jurors in Mr. Bernard's case, 5 of the surviving 9 jurors in Mr. Bernard's case, as well as the prosecutor in that case, have since changed their minds about Bernard's death sentence. The jury foreman said publicly that he thought the lawyers did a poor job in representing him, saying that they were simply going through the motions and nothing else. And additionally, Brandon Bernard's lawyers now maintain that there were pieces of facts during the trial that, if they were introduced, would have persuaded the jury against the death penalty. And I'll note here that this is common in death penalty cases, this combination of overzealous prosecution and poor legal representation. And so high-profile figures like Kim Kardashian West have also come out in support of Mr. Bernard, urging officials to permanently stay his execution and arguing that imprisonment is punishment enough, especially given all of the good work that he's done while in prison. But despite all of that opposition and all of that advocacy, a federal judge denied a motion to stay Mr. Bernard's execution earlier this week. So without a last-minute intervention by Donald Trump, the very person who was responsible for fast-tracking this execution, Mr. Bernard will become the latest casualty in a practice that is not only ineffective, but also inhumane and cruel. And when I say ineffective, I really mean ineffective, because there is no indication that the death penalty prevents people from committing crime. Studies show that while the certainty of punishment can be a deterrent, the severity of the punishment is not. And so, but putting aside the stated purpose of the death penalty, Brandon Bernard is a human being. I mean, listen to the words of his own daughter, who in a recent interview said that she was shattered to hear that her father's execution was proceeding despite all of the good that he's done while in prison. Now, the details of this case get even more upsetting when you look at the broader context that it's occurring under. On November 19th, the federal government executed Orlando Cordia Hall, carrying out the first execution of an outgoing president in 100 years. So it appears that the Trump administration right now is preparing to execute as many people as it possibly can before Joe Biden takes the presidency on January 20th, as President-elect Biden has pledged to not use the federal death penalty. And at the moment, 5 more executions are scheduled, including Brandon Bernard's, over the next 40 days. 4 of those executions are scheduled to happen against Black men. The 5th person is Lisa Montgomery, a white woman who has a mental illness and is a survivor of sexual and physical abuse. And she is set to become the first woman in 70 years to be executed by the federal government. Now, if all this upsets you, good. It should. This is a cruel, inhumane, and unjust practice that our government is engaging in. But fortunately, we have some wonderful, incredible guests who are here today to help us channel our rage effectively. I'm so pleased to introduce Representative Ayanna Pressley and Sister Helen Prejean, two fierce advocates for ending the death penalty. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
So,
Congresswoman, we're going to have to come together around this, but certainly appreciate the opportunity to continue to shine a spotlight on the injustice that is state-sanctioned murder.
Absolutely. It's completely devastating that we have to be bringing light to this issue, but unfortunately, here we are. Congresswoman Pressley, I'll start with you. I want to ask about your reaction. I want to start by asking your reaction to Mr. Bernard's scheduled execution. And I want to ask you also, is there anything you or our viewers or anyone else can do to save his life?
You know, it just, my heart is so heavy that we're just mere hours away from Brandon being killed. And the latest on the list of people that Donald Trump has cruelly and unjustly scheduled for death in the waning days of this administration. Murdering Brandon will only further advance cycles of trauma and harm. It's another demonstration of the legacy of this country where we treat trauma with more trauma. As you know, Brandon's childhood was marked by poverty, physical and verbal abuse, trauma, homelessness, chronic instability, all of which, if left unaddressed, can have devastating consequences on one's health and wellness. And so I've been in solidarity with the activists and advocates and millions of concerned community members across the country in calling on Donald Trump to commute Brandon's sentence in the name of justice. You know, Angela Davis reminds us that, you know, although there are some that believe social problems go to jail, it's actually human beings. And because of Brandon's circumstances, which are undeniably the result of trauma and our broken legal system, any reasonable and just society should not treat trauma with more trauma. So we have got to break these endless cycles of cruelty and intergenerational trauma so we can finally start to work towards healing and accountability. But my heart is very heavy. I'm heartened by the number of people who see his humanity, who are fighting for his very life, and who have moved with great love and compassion in these final days and hours. And I don't want us to stop fighting. That's why we're doing this today.
You know, Representative, I'm really happy you brought up how this is a result of a broken legal system. And you've spoken in the past and you've written about how capital punishment can't be separated from the broader racism of the criminal legal system. And we're seeing this play out right now when the executions that are happening within the next 40 days, 4 of them are of Black men. So can you help explain the role that race plays in the imposition of the death penalty?
I guess I would just say in terms of the entire system, there's no way that it could be separated. You know, it is the consequence of a confluence of a racist society born out of the original sin of slavery, which dehumanizes. And then again, a system that does not center the humanity and dignity of people, and that criminalizes people for our state of life, for our race. And that's why I introduced the People's Justice Guarantee which is a radical reimagining of our criminal legal system, one that does center the humanity and dignity of people, but moreover, is about decriminalizing poverty and substance use and mental health and homelessness and low-level offenses.
So I have one more question for you, Representative, and then I'll turn to Sister Helen and then come back to you.
Please, because I want to hear from Sister Helen.
Well, you mentioned your bill.
Yes.
Which I think I would love to hear more about that, and also what the expectation of that bill, particularly with a Biden administration and with a new Congress in terms of its ability to be able to pass.
Sure. Well, what I've introduced with the People's Justice Guarantee, which I introduced a year ago and will be reintroducing in this 117th Congress, again, is a completely new framework. We cannot tinker at the edges. We have to be bold. And so I've already been in conversations with the Biden-Harris administration, lobbying them and just in close communication in the hopes that they will use the People's Justice Guarantee as their framework for their agenda around criminal justice reform. There are a number of bills that I've introduced to support these broader tenets of the People's Justice Guarantee, and one of them is abolishing the federal death penalty. But in advance of that, in addition to fighting to save Brandon's life right now in the immediate and lobbying the administration, the Trump administration, to commute his sentence, I'm also in communication with the Biden-Harris administration and lobbying for us to halt federal executions, which they can do by the stroke of a pen, by executive action on day one, and save lives. And then beyond that, again, I think to get to the longer term solutions, using my People's Justice Guarantee as a new framework.
Sister Helen, now I'll turn to you. So we've seen in this case, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, this combination of poor legal representation and overzealous prosecutorial action. Can you talk a little bit from your years of work advocating against the death penalty, how common this is, and sort of if you can speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. Look, I really have seen the pattern. The reason that Brandon and so many others, everybody on death row is poor. There's not a single person sentenced to death in this country, or the 1,500 plus people who have been gassed, shot, electrocuted, and lethally injected, ever had money. And there's a real reason for that. And it is those with money get a crackerjack attorney, and a prosecutor will think 50 times before they go after that person for the death penalty and lose in public. So the poor are dispensable. And what skewed from the start is that when the Gregg decision of this US Supreme Court, made up of privileged people, we have to remember, who have never endured these sufferings, and they look and they interpret the Constitution in a way that says, where they see equal justice under law in the 14th Amendment, they see it, they see the words, but they don't have any experience of knowing what it means. And they, in the Gregg decision, which supposedly was to remedy the capriciousness in which the Supreme Court in Furman in 72 had overturned the death penalty, found it unconstitutional because it was so capricious in its application. It's like being struck by lightning. So the Gregg decision, which put the death penalty back, supposedly gave us guidelines that the juries could have so they wouldn't act capriciously anymore. But the guideline they gave was, don't give the death penalty for ordinary murders. Don't give the death penalty for garden variety killings. It's only to be reserved for the worst of the worst. So out of all the murders that happen in the country, you're to select out the worst of the worst. So that criteria, it's fuzzy. It could never be interpreted. It's always going to be up to people's individual thing. Well, I see this as the worst of the worst. And you want to see how race plays out in it. 8 out of every 10 people sentenced is because they kill white people. When decisions are made, this is the worst of the worst, 8 out of every 10, because white people are the victims. White people are cared about. There's outrage over the death of white people. whereas 50% or more of the homicides in this country are people of color. But if you don't care about the life of the person, you're not outraged by their death. When I lived in the St. Thomas housing projects, Virginia Carr had 2 sons murdered within 6 months, and the DA's office in New Orleans did not even investigate it. You got to care about the people. So the skewed part of, so in Greg, you're going to have this criteria now of only select the worst of the worst. And then that's coupled with what makes it and what we see now in the Trump bar killings. You leave it up to the discretion of the prosecutor whether or not you're going to seek death. You are leaving that decision for life or death in the hands of often venal, politically driven, biased, partially seeing human beings that can be swayed by all kind of currents. I mean, the statistics show among DAs that when they're up for election, especially in the South, they'd go for the death penalty. So many currents in the water that affect them. And so, and this is egregiously shown. It is just like a bright light showing now, for 17 years, you don't have federal executions until you get Trump and Barr. And that's a decision. We're going to be tough on crime. We're going to show we're for law and order. We're going to bring back the death penalty. The same Trump that took out full-page ads for the Central Park 5. Let's bring back the death penalty. He believes in getting what he wants by force and intimidation. So now in his final wrecking ball on the killing of human lives, not to mention that 3,000 people a day now are dying from COVID, and that's directly responsible in his hands too because of his huge neglect and lack of leadership in dealing with this for the people. And so here we have the death of Brandon. Here we have the death of these human beings. And the only way we change things, I was saying to Brandon yesterday when we were talking, he's okay. And when I say he's okay, I mean he's really spiritually poised. St. Paul had talked about being spiritually poised that you could go to death or to life. He's sleeping through the night. He is poised. He has been through, I think, so much suffering and remorse for what he did. And he was able to talk yesterday about what he's grateful for, of the people who have come to his aid. By noon yesterday, there were 350,000 appeals to the White House. We do not believe the White House can even hear the appeals, but it is up to the hearts and minds of the people. And I said to Brandon, if you die, along with all these others, perhaps it can help wake up the American people, and your death could be redemptive, that we can shut down the death penalty across the nation because people see how the deaths are happening and will decide to shut it down, not just at the federal level, but also across the land in the states. It is on its way out. I mean, state after state. There are only 2% of counties where prosecutors continue to avidly seek the death penalty. Most of the people are shutting it down. Juries are not voting for death. Prosecutors aren't seeking it. It's just that pocket hole because they have the authority to seek death or not. They still have that absolute authority of the divine right of kings that they can choose who lives and who dies, and they can go for death or not. But the people have to be awake to shut it down. And I was just thinking this morning, the court follows the people. The Supreme Court does not lead the people in any issues of race. The Supreme Court has never led. In Plessy v. Ferguson, they upheld Jim Crow. We could give a whole list of racially biased decisions the Supreme Court has made. And I think it's because they make decisions out of their privilege and out of their experience. And as Thurgood Marshall said, the first African-American person on the Supreme Court, if a Black man reads those words, equal justice under law, and a rich white person who's gone to a prep school and had excellent education and resources all their life reads equal protection under the law, you read those words very differently. And they can use all these arguments of originalism or textualism, whatever. We bring life experience to a text when we interpret it. And so what has happened, what will happen, as the people wake up, as the people shut it down, the court will follow.
Go ahead. Oh, Representative, unmute yourself.
I got it. My sister, I mean, she said it all, both the historical contextualizing, and I really appreciate the emphasis on the people because, you know, look, my father cycled in and out of the criminal legal system for 14 years. My husband was just as involved from the age of 11 until his 20s, and then was incarcerated for 10 years. We need to fight for Brandon like he is our own son. Okay, and so in these remaining hours, I want to give folks an action that they can do. Again, in fighting for him as if he is a member of your own family, because he is. We are one human family, and our destinies are tied. And state-sanctioned murder is not justice. And Donald Trump, this will be their legacy. The willful criminality to allow a pandemic to rage out of control that has disproportionately impacted the most marginalized. And now the cruelty that we first came to know of him in calling for the lynching and the execution of 5 innocent young Black men. You know, death and cruelty will be his legacy. But in these final hours, we can do everything possible by going to helpsavebrandon.com. There is you can go there, you can submit a letter. I don't want you to get in your own way on this and say, who will read it? Will it make a difference? Will it matter? Fight for him as if he is a member of your family, because he is. And then again, in terms of the long-term reforms that need to happen, just going back to my People's Justice Guarantee, I introduced my bill the day the administration, actually my bill to abolish the federal death penalty. I introduced that the day the Trump administration announced that they would be resuming this. So it would abolish the death penalty at the federal level. It would require resentencing for those currently on death row. And that bill number, my bill to abolish the federal death penalty, is HR 4052. So you can tell folks to call their members. But for today, let's just be focused on saving Brandon. And I think what you know, our dear sister here so eloquently speaks to with the historical contextualizing is that this has been legislated brutality. And this is so systemic and it's so structural, and it affirms that 1, elections matter, and 2, that this is structural and systemic. And so we have to be active and bold in dismantling it. And again, that's why I've introduced the People's Justice Guarantee as a new framework, because we can't tinker at the edges here. We have to stop criminalizing poverty. We have to stop treating trauma with more trauma.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you bring up more than once the intergenerational and the cyclical use of trauma and how the death penalty perpetuates that. And it brings me to something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and I'm going to turn this question to Sister Helen, which is Lisa Montgomery's execution, which is scheduled for January 14th. She's now set to be the first woman in 70 years to be executed by the federal government. She suffers from mental illness, years of trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse. And so despite these details, the execution is still scheduled to happen along with those 4 others. So Sister, could you fill us in on the latest details about her case? And if you have information about the other cases as well on those 2.
Let's concentrate on Lisa. Kate Porterfield, who is the psychologist who has been working with her and talked about her trauma in depth. She was not just traumatized, she was tortured. When she was just 4 years old, her sister in the twin bed in the same room with her, uncles and their own father would come in and rape her sister. And family services took the sister away, but left Lisa. And the stepfather had even built a separate building next to the trailer where he could routinely rape his stepdaughter. At her trial, the prosecutor who was seeking her death said that she used the abuse excuse. And it just shows the total lack of the mitigating circumstances that should have been presented to the jury, and how trauma and how traumatized women act. She would detach from reality. I would have too, as a child. Where do you go inside yourself when this is happening to you? So that she would disconnect and make her own reality. If she were not given antipsychotic drugs to stay in reality, the Supreme Court has held that people out of touch with reality cannot be executed. You have to keep her medicated in order to kill her. That's how bad this is. And then if you want to look at sheer capriciousness, how many days before Biden comes in, who would save her life, and Trump, is she caught? And when they told Lisa, the extended date of her execution, because both of her lawyers have COVID. They have a serious case of COVID. There are people getting infected with COVID who attend executions at Terre Haute. Hundreds of people are involved in these executions. And out of the Perky execution that happened, they've tracked that at least 8 people got COVID from being there. The lawyers have tried to use that too. The health of people that are their own lives being threatened by coming in to witness and to be part of the execution of this woman. And when she was told the extended date to give her lawyers more time, she said 8 days, 8 days between life and death. And it shows the absolute, just what word do you use to entrust to these very human, venal, capricious agents this absolute power? And then you set up a system in which it plays out in this. If she had had a decent lawyer, if she had had a mitigation expert that could have told her story to that jury, they never would have voted for death, even if the prosecutor went for it. When he'd say something like abuse, excuse, that mitigation specialist could have said to them, let me tell you about her life and what it means when women are traumatized and how they act. Because she did an unspeakable act. And when you just look at the horribleness of how Trump and Barr selected who's going to die. First 5 were people who had killed children. Let's go for the child killers. That'll get sympathy from the public. And there they are in this discriminating mode of, oh, we'll pick this one and this one and this one. Here's the worst of the worst. The fact is, when any human being is killed, we are unique and irreplaceable in this universe. It is always the worst of the worst. And it just shows, and Lisa in particular. And then her lawyers are also fighting for her because she was abused, and fighting for her not to be sent to a male prison where the video cameras and the male guards are constantly going to be looking at her. And one of the first things they did was they took away her underwear. And she's in this kind of shift dress, and they're watching her all the time. How can she? I mean, it's so beyond the pale when you get to the human suffering. And I think the reason it's lasted this long, that we still are among the nations in the world that still execute, because I've accompanied 6 human beings to execution. It is a secret ritual, and that is by design, that people do not see the suffering of a live human being being walked across a hall through a door and strapped down and killed. And we don't even know that the lethal injection, we can't call it humane. 200 autopsies have showed that because in the lethal injection, lungs were filled with fluid, so people are drowning as they are dying, but because they're medicated, people can't see the suffering. We have been masking death. We put it behind prison walls with only a few prisoners, with only a few witnesses. And there have been at least 2 court cases to make it public, and that's been defeated. And I think that's by design. So those of us who are witnesses, those of us who are in there, those of us who see the suffering, we're the ones that got to come out and be witnesses to the people and just say, we are good people. We are good and fair people. We, the American people, we have to shut this down. It's about us. They did terrible crimes. Okay. Not okay that they did the crimes, but human beings are going to do terrible crimes. But this is about us. Who are we as a people?
You know, if more people had to more of our elected officials had had to witness the cruelty of federal executions or any executions, that we'd have a real change in policy in this country.
And let us also not forget that 1 in 25 on death row are innocent. So, again, to the sister's point around the systemic biases in criminalizing of the poor and people of color, putting them at a disadvantage in terms of legal representation.
Right.
And so it just.
Right. And for every 9 people that have been executed of the 1,500 plus, for every 9 that have been executed, 1 has had to be let go and exonerated because it was a mistake. 1 out of 9. 9. I mean, imagine trying to book an airplane flight and they say, look, before you get this ticket, we have to tell you, here are your chances. Look how broken this system is. How could it not be broken? Where you have only poor people, you have poor defense, and you have prosecutors with political interest in going after the death penalty. This is a political statement by President Trump and Attorney General Barr. It is a political statement. Here is how we make our mark, to just show that we're for law and order and all that, and to play to certain constituents that, yeah, that's what we want.
And so, sister, to your point around this is the commentary on who are we as a society. So again, in these final hours, let's do everything in our power. Please go to Brandon's website so that you can make those interventions, lobby, up until the very end to fight for his life as if he's our own family. And then join me in solidarity in lobbying the Biden-Harris administration to, with a stroke of a pen, halt all federal executions. They have the authority. I encourage them to use that. You can also, they can also require the DOJ to no longer seek the death penalty for future cases, as well as to permanently dismantle the Terre Haute facility where federal executions actually take place. And then, of course, I'll continue to lobby for all the tenets enumerated in this radical reimagining of our criminal legal system with the People's Justice Guarantee. But for right now, in these final hours, please go to helpsavebrandon.com. As the sister said, we know the callousness of Donald Trump and of Barr and this Department of Injustice. But this is a commentary and a testament to who are we as a society? Who are you? So please go to helpsavebrandon.com.
And one other thing, because when I was talking to Brandon yesterday, he's a transformed man. He truly is. He's expressing gratitude. He's thanking everybody around him. And so I told him, I said, I'm going to be out there fighting for you, Brandon, in media interviews and all. And he said, just please convey my thanks to all the people that are praying for me, because I really feel it. I can feel people's love and support, and it's really helping me. So we fight for him. We raise our voices. We raise our voices too, as much for ourselves, for his life, because his death and all these deaths that have happened, maybe we've been asleep most of the time. I've found out in talking to the American people in every state in this country for over 30 years that most people don't reflect deeply about the death penalty at all. It's not because we're bad people. It's just that most people's lives aren't touched by the death penalty. It's not, with all the things going on, and they have a very superficial surface, like, oh, well, if they did that crime, they ought to die. That's only the surface soul. When you bring the people close, and when they read, it's why I wrote Dead Man Walking. It's why I write my books. It's why I go to speak to people. When you bring people close, they are good hearts. They get it. And they go, well, I didn't know it was like that. We shouldn't be killing people like this.
And we certainly should not be killing the people who are set to be executed starting tonight, starting with Brandon Bernard. So thank you both so much for all of the incredible work you've done to amplify this issue. We'll all be hoping for a miracle by tonight. And for those watching at home, thank you for tuning in. We'll be here tomorrow on the Appeal Live at noon to discuss what Biden can do about student loan debt. That's Eastern time. Thank you both.